Yes. I do have that Fujita NX3 here as well.
It's just click.
Yeah, it's not a little slow.
And it's sticky. Forward, yeah. So thanks for coming out, folks, and thanks for having us here. This has been really terrific. And boy, I'm almost thinking about changing the nature of what I was going to talk about after listening to everybody else. It seems pretty clear to me that from listening to the people we've heard so far that what we all have in common is that we sort of go out into the world and we modify that world through the use of the book in some way to talk about our own preoccupations. And in some way that sounds like poetry to me. And I find that to be pretty interesting. I love the book. I have a huge book problem. My wife keeps trying to institute a one in and one out rule. Never going to happen. But I thought it was really interesting to listen to everybody else and to see not only the overlap in the kinds of books we were looking at, but the kinds of places we were looking at books in. I think when I was listening to Paola, I totally related to the photographer's place. There wasn't the web. If you wanted to see pictures, you had to look at books. And so you were in the library, or you were at the photographer's place. And it was an amazing place. And I remember very clearly going there to look for a book of Robert Frank's, Lines of My Hand, that I'd only seen a couple of little excerpts from in someone else's slide talk. And I got there and I said, I want this, and I went up to the counter and I said, I want this book. And they said, oh yeah, you got it on the waiting list for that book. And they hand me a big old yellow pad, and it's got 3 pages of names on it, and the second name at the beginning of the list is Robert Frank. And I said, okay, I'm never getting that book, but that's what it was like, the book hunt then. Even Robert was hunting, right? So, so books for me have been really important. It was interesting to hear the thing about you not reading. I also had a lot of problems reading, and I think both photography and image making in the beginning gave me another way to understand the world. And then in a way, looking at photography books removed my fear of the book. And now I'm a great big reader. I read huge amounts. And so it was sort of this backwards entree for me into the literary world. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, that is sticky, some of my influences, and I'll show you the couple of books that I've made and a little bit from the book that I have that's just about to come out. So this was one of the things that I love about books is that they travel. Right, is that they move and you find them in the most unexpected places. And the idea of my books moving in a similar kind of way is amazing to me. Again, I'm a book hunter, so as a young person, maybe 19 or 20, I wanted this book by Gary Winogrand called The Animals, and I've been looking for it for like 3 years to no avail. And I was spending the night at a friend's house in Maine, and I rolled over in the morning and looked down, and there was The Animals leveling the bed that I was sleeping in. And I realized I loved it. I still have the book. It's got the big dent in it. I went downstairs, can I have it, you know? And so for me, one of the first books that showed me what photography could really do in terms of sequence and in terms of building a book in an almost literary fashion was the Americans. And the Americans is much based on Robert Frank's great mentor. We heard a little bit about before Water Ends. And Frank's book was interesting for me because, first of all, it's broken into chapters, which was interesting for a photographic book at the time. And secondly, because he understood that he could create a new language within the photographic book by repeating motifs and kinds of images and teaching us, in fact, as we went through the book, how to understand the language that he was writing as he was making the book. And that seemed like a really great thing for me, and sort of got me thinking about books right from the beginning and making books. This is a book that I found that at some point got stolen from Northfield Mount Herman, I think, in 1974, and it's that thing about a book traveling that I really like. I bought this book that no one else would have bought because it's all written in because it had this young woman trying to write in Kerouac prose about her relationship to who she wanted to be and where she wanted to go, and trying to write in both the cadence of Kerouac but also the cadence of the Americans. And I just thought that was the coolest thing, right? And so here it is 20-something years after that book was made, and it's found this whole new life in another place. Some young woman finds this thing, steals it from the library, I guess, writes it and sends it to a friend. It's amazing, right? These are other, and these aren't necessarily my biggest influences, but my influences in terms of photo books. This is a big influence for me. Larry Fink, a photographer who was, a Marxist and who was making these photographs for the Village Voice at the time, of very fancy, expensive parties in New York, and at the same time photographing the parties of the people who lived in his local neighborhood near the farm that he had in Pennsylvania. And he puts those two groups of pictures to talk together in a very interesting way to talk about the disconnect between how those two populations were living. Great find by Susan Liver, really actually a kind of hard book to find. Again, a kind of narration that is of a specific part of the world that is very much about place, but also very much almost about an imagined place. I was blown away when I first saw this book, Bill Burke's I Want to Take Pictures, because it's made out of the country of his homeland. It's in Cambodia and Vietnam, just post to the war, and it's put together in a way to sort of tell us a little bit about what was going on there, but it's a narrative about his life and his divorce and his life sort of disintegrating in some way. And I think to try and find a way to put those completely different subjects together in a successful way that he did, and who doesn't love the duct tape on the outside? It's as if it was a notebook or something. And in photo books, you didn't just, there were a few people doing that, but you didn't really do that, right? You didn't make something that looked bad, right? Or looked handmade in a way. There were a few people doing that, Keith Smith, for instance. And the great late Larry Sultan, who made a terrific book about his family. This book, which is filled with Super 8 photographs he made, text that he pulled from family letters. He really creates a real great sense of both the beauty and tragedy of a family, right? And its longevity in some way. So this is the first book that I made, Where We Find Ourselves. And in a way, it's funny that Tony brought up the piece that I wrote in the beginning of that book, because I really didn't want there to be any text in the book at all. And it was my first book, and I was fighting a lot with the publisher, who was actually a really great editor and a really great publisher, but we were fighting a lot, and he insisted that there be an essay in there by me, as well as an essay by someone who was well-established, quotes, right? Historian or something. And so I said, okay, I'll write this thing, but I wanted to go back. And he said, okay, and then he said, no. And it's going to be in the front after I sent it in, and I got in a big fight with him. I said, fine, I need to do a rewrite, I need to do an edit. And I put that little piece in the beginning as my kind of FU to the publisher. Well, I'll put it in the front, but I'm going to tell people they should go read it later. Right? So that's how, so the book publishing thing is interesting because it's a constant fight between what someone else wants the thing, imagines the thing to be, and what you imagine it to be. And sometimes they're right, actually, and sometimes you're right. And you have to sort of pick your places where you're going to fight. This was a pretty straightforward book in terms of its subject, and I just really wanted to, it was, for me, an investigation of both my youth in some way, but also the places that we go to relax. And I was thinking a lot about American painting, and thinking specifically about our sort of religious, mythic relationship to the landscape in some way. And I tried to go to places to see if that stuff held true. It didn't, So it was as much about us being on the precipice as it was about anything else. So a lot of the pictures were like that. So that was the front of the book, and this is the back, and it really, the sequence was very important to me. It's sequenced in kind of circular pattern where we begin as people are almost, and I think I kept, so in the beginning here, this is sort of the opening of the book. It's not the exact sequence, but the idea is that we're being born, again, I'm taking this thing right out of American painting, right? People coming out of these dark openings as if they're being born into the world, and then and building groups of photographs. And much the way that James was talking about, I was making the photographs, and it wasn't until later that I started to sort of put something together. So again, things are broken, people on the precipice, but also a kind of birthing picture in some way. Spawning, and on the precipice. And as the book goes on, things get a little bit more dangerous, and then at the very end, and I'm skipping here, right? So things start to get a little bit more dangerous, and a little weirder. And then we start moving into some of the kind of more death-like pictures, and then it starts praying, and then it starts over again. This is the next book that I made, Pieces of String, and this one I started working with a publisher, Radius Books, who are just amazing. They really, we think a lot about it together. We spend a lot of time thinking about how we're going to put the book together and what it's going to feel like, and how people hold it, you know, everything from size to paper. So this book's interesting. It looks like it has all these stains all over that, but that's actually printed. It's a book of photographs that I made in the homes of people who had died. I was photographing the things that were left there, trying to talk about, you know, this preponderance of being, the sort of vegetable thing that sort of exists there, but also the idea of not just of what we leave behind, but the sort of humbleness of our lives and what that looks like in the end in some way. And so the way we built this book, which I just love, but as an example of where you can go too far, I went to do a talk out in California, and they ordered like 100 books for the book signing, and I got there and they said we had to send all the books back because they were all stained. And I said, well, so that's where you can screw it up, right? You go too far, you do too much, and I have, believe me, even from friends, I've gotten notes, hey, why'd you send me the messed up one, you know? But no, it was meant to be that way. And the thing was meant to open up, like a box. It's got a Japanese binding, only it opens, set the back, it would open backwards normally, I have it opening correctly, but it opens up, the rubber comes off, you open it up, there's an inset photograph there, and it's supposed to be like you're opening up a box, and then there's a book, and inside the book, let me get this to go, is another little book with an essay, and then you move that book, and you see the little piece of string on the side, and the title is, so everything was considered in this. It was really fun to do. And really so much more of how I want to be thinking about making books, right? And we talked about this a little bit before, about the thing being an object in some way. And so the thing sort of opens up, and that's all the pieces sort of out in one place. It's still got this one problem where if the rubber band's not on, everything falls out, you know, so we tried to fix it and finally came up. And these are some of the photographs from that book. Let's see if I change hands here, if that helps. Oh, there we go. It's a little sad. So as I was finishing this book, and most of these pictures are made, you know, within probably 50 miles of here, I started traveling a little further afield. I was able to make this book because my brother is an engineer. And so he was getting me into the homes of people who died before we cleaned out their houses, with their permission and stuff. And as I was doing this, I started also looking a little farther afield. I started traveling to, because people were leaving houses at that time. This was right around when I was finishing this, about the last election. And people were leaving their houses because of foreclosures, you know, thinking, you know, to the 2008 decline. Soon after that, people were losing their houses and leaving houses. So I started traveling to some of those places too, to see what it looked like when people left those spaces in a similar way. And what I found was, and again, the last election was going on, and I started thinking about how all the conversation was much about the middle class, the 1%, and the people I was seeing in these small towns that I was going to were not remotely part of that conversation. And so I started making pictures in those places, and over the last couple of years, maybe 2.5 years, I've been photographing there, and I just, in back we just printed this new book in Italy, which I don't have a copy of here. I just have the F and G's, which means folded and gathered. It's the actual book from the press, but it just hasn't been bound together. So I brought that so you can see it, and I took some pictures. It's titled Elegy, and unlike the other book, which is small and supposed to fit in your hand and feel intimate, this is a large book. It's I think almost 14 inches high and 13 inches wide, and the pictures are large. When you open it up, they're like 13 by 18 inches, the photographs. And I did something I never thought I would do, which is to lay the photo, which is a big no-no in photos, to lay the photographs across the gutter. But we came up with this new binding, which is a lay flat binding. It has no spine in the back of the book, but still a hardcover cardboard part. So when you open it up, it actually lays almost perfectly flat. And we decided, since there's 2 aspect ratios of photographs in the pictures, that we could move the pictures back and forth this way across as a way of creating movement in the book. So the pictures sort of move back. I'll show you in a second. The pictures sort of move back and forth across. I also wanted the book to be, it's kind of a weird thing to make this big fancy book that costs, a ton of money to buy, more money than the people I'm photographing in some way could afford, and to have it be really kind of beautiful. So we worked pretty hard to try and keep the price down, and keeping the price down means like $50, in this case, because it's gotten so expensive. But we used like a raw cardboard, we used a little cheaper paper, and then we printed it so that the wrap, it's got no jacket, the wrap comes about 3/4 of the way around, and then just goes to raw cardboard. So it feels much like the places where the sort of veneers are being stripped away constantly in the physical places. So these are some of the pictures that I was making here. And what I did, I photographed so much, it's almost more than I've ever photographed in my life in a short period of time, like a lot. And I photographed a lot anyway, but this was, it was kind of crazy, and I just started photographing. I started in the backyards, in people's backyards, and photographing those, treating them like I was treating the interiors of people's houses before, trying to sort of tell the story of who lived there, the objects that were in those places. And then I started photographing the places where people used to work, and then the whole town, and then finally the people. And the way the book is structured is to sort of think about the history of the place through the architecture, the present sort of through the backyards, and the people as the future in some way, or the potential future of the place and the action. So this piece that I'm just going to, this is right out of the middle of the book, around about a third in actually. And so this is an actual little piece of the sequence. So we start here, so you just get a sense of the way it's sequenced. And it's got kind of a hard sequence. So I go from this sort of collapsing house to the sort of collapsing man, to the dead bird, and there's all sorts of color relationships which are making us draw between those photographs. To the picture, to this photograph, which has, it's very difficult to see probably in the slide, but there's all these little things that have been set up by a child, and it's sort of a crying child in the window, a little pair of underwear. We go to this young kid on the curb, looking back at us in a stern way. To the wolves, looking back at us in a similar way. To the man and the cat. To the dead animal. And this is rough, but it's like, and then the God is dead. So, lest there be confusion. So, it's pretty, it's sort of the most straightforward I've ever been. I tried to be really hard-edged about it, and so that's the sequence from that. I'm just going to show you a few more books that aren't mine. These are books that I think, because book making has changed so incredibly. Even in the last 5 years, it's sort of exploded, and there's really amazing things going on out there. And I think some of the best things are actually self-published things. If you look at like the Aperture Prize, which maybe isn't the best gauge, it seems to go often to a self-published book and not to a big company book. And I think that's interesting. Young people they're good with the computer, they become good designers, And I think that the way they're both using photographs, maybe not even photographs that are owned, but the way they're using photographs to build narrative is pretty incredible. This is Ron June, who is a photographer. He's incredibly prolific. This is probably his 12th book in as many years. This is, I think, a very good book where he goes out and starts photographing in the desert and makes a group of photographs which build a narrative about what he remembers or imagines his life as a child in this space that he grew up in. So they're not the places he actually grew up. He's just making his photographs that in some way mimic his experience of that place 40 years ago. And it's a pretty incredibly built and sequenced body of work. This is just a little insert from a book by Christian Pedersen called Red-Headed Peckerwood, where he takes almost all found photographs and pieces of text and builds a sort of fictional, non-fiction. It's from a true story, but it's very loosely about two young guys who took off on a killing spree in Indiana. And he builds a narrative totally out of photographs and objects that he puts in there, and also little bits of, I put the receipts in there, like receipts that they might have had from getting lunch somewhere and stuff. It builds this it's a pretty amazing book, actually. I think it's like in its third printing. Originally self-published and then picked up by Mac. Jason Fulford also works with a lot of found photographs. He was, this one's called The Mushroom Collector. Someone sent him a group of found photographs of that somebody had taken of different mushrooms and left annotations on them, and then he edits those together with his own pictures to make what is a quite interesting book. Reminds me quite a lot of you finding your way. Yeah, I just think, it's so, I mean, it's just such amazing things happening in the photography world. And they aren't always the things or the way that I would do them, but I just think it's such an open world, and there's so many ways to do things on your own without having to struggle to find the huge amounts of money that you might need to do a book through a big publisher. And some of the books that I'm getting online or buying through, there's a great website called it's a collection started by a young woman named Larissa Claire that's called oh my God, just went right out of my head. She started basically this huge collection that she travels around and it only lets into the collection books, photo books that were made, that were self-published. And it's and then she'll go to schools and do these big things. She's at all the conferences and stuff. It's a great thing. Incredible book. An aperture book, but an incredible book. LaToya Ruby Frazier, really tells about the history of her town and her family in this small town in Pennsylvania. A lot made with photographs, a lot made with found photographs, tons of texts. Really text-heavy book, but just does such an amazing job of following the sort of ups and downs of a single family within this place. Pretty recent book, Steve Smith, Waiting for the Latter Days, is a book made by, there's tons of small presses out there, and this is made by TIS Books, which is called This Is Sausage, which is sort of funny, but Steve's a pretty well-known photographer, but they came to him, somebody had seen some of his early black and white photographs, so they went to him and he called together this group of photographs that he made, some of them as a teenager growing up in the Mormon community that he grew up in, and built, both the text is really good, which is very short but very good, but the sequence of photographs is unbelievably strong. It really tells a story about what it was like to live in that place and at that time, under the sort of religious rule that he was involved in. And lastly, Paul Gaffney's, he walked for 2 years, I think, and made photographs along the way. And the book is a very beautiful meditation on that walk. And it's a book that he originally, shocked I found this, it's the original edition that he printed on his inkjet printer and distributed that way first. And then it took off, and then he made another printing of the book that was a little bit larger. So that's it for me, pretty sure. Oh, good talk.